Do you ever have one moment that just tips everything over? For me, it was cake. Yeah, actual cake. Flour, sugar, and 20 years of quiet resentment baked into one night that nobody saw coming. People think revenge has to be loud, but mine? It was silent, sweet, and served at my stepmom's 50th birthday party. This isn't about baking. It's about finally standing up to the woman who made my life hell, and realizing sometimes the best payback doesn't come with a scream. It comes with frosting. You know, people always talk about evil stepmothers like it's a fairy tale cliche, like it's something that only happens in Disney movies. I wish, because for me, it was real. And she wasn't just mean, she was vindictive. The kind of person who gets a kick out of watching someone else flinch. My stepmom was that kind of woman. Sharp tongue, fake smile, always ready to tear someone down if it made her feel an inch taller. And the worst part? She raised me. My mom was in and out of inpatient care for most of my childhood. Mental health, addiction, all that heavy stuff nobody likes to talk about. And my dad? He worked across the road, always on call, always gone. So that left her. I was 4 when she came into our lives. 4. Old enough to notice things, too young to understand how bad they could get. At first, I thought she was just strict, you know? The kind of tough love parent who wanted structure and rules. But no, she didn't want to raise me. She wanted to own me. She'd find the smallest reasons to tear into me. Didn't matter if it was a messy room, a B on a test, or just my face being too much like my mom's. She'd twist everything into a moral failure. Mine. "You think you're better than everyone, don't you?" she'd sneer. Even when I was just a kid, sitting quietly at the kitchen table doing homework. Better than who? I barely had clean socks most weeks. But I learned fast. I learned that her moods were storms you could see coming if you paid attention. The way her eyes would narrow when Dad complimented me. The tight smile when teachers praised me in front of family. She hated it. Because every time I did something right, it reminded her of everything she wasn't. As I got older, it only got worse. She'd nitpick my clothes, my friends, my body. She'd make little digs in public. "Oh, she's clever, but she doesn't know how to listen, does she? She tries so hard. Bless her heart." Those little Southern-style jabs that sound polite, but cut like a blade. And if I pushed back, if I so much as rolled my eyes or said anything back, she'd turn into a victim on the spot. Crocodile tears, trembling lip. "Why do you hate me so much? I'm just trying to help you." Classic manipulator. By the time I hit high school, I'd already built a kind of invisible armor. I did everything right. Straight A's, clubs, volunteer work, worked part-time as soon as I was legally allowed to. If I couldn't earn love, at least I could earn independence. And for a while, I actually believed that maybe, just maybe, if I kept proving myself, she'd stop seeing me as competition. Spoiler alert, she didn't. I'll never forget my graduation night. Everyone else's parents were crying, taking pictures, hugging them. Mine? She handed me a manila envelope. Inside, a notice to vacate the property. Yeah, you heard that right. I was 18, diploma still warm in my hands, and she was kicking me out, No warning, no reason, other than, quote, "You're an adult now. Time to make your own way." Dad tried to step in, said it was his house too, but she had already called the cops just in case I didn't go quietly. The officer that showed up, I'll never forget how he looked at me. Like he'd seen this kind of thing before. Like he wanted to say something but couldn't. He told us, technically, she could file trespassing charges if I came back. Imagine that. A cop telling you you're not welcome in your own childhood home. So I packed up what I could fit into 2 garbage bags and left. 18 years old, homeless, and supposed to start college that fall. I'd turned down scholarships to stay close to home, to save money. What a joke. For months, I slept on couches, in my car, wherever I could. I picked up every shift I could find, gas stations, diners, anything that kept me afloat. The depression hit hard. You ever feel so numb that even breathing feels like work? That was me. I tried to stay in school, but I just couldn't. Between the bills, the exhaustion, the heartbreak, I dropped out. And you know what she did? She called me every few weeks, not to check on me, not to help, to gloat. "Oh, how's the real world treating you?" she'd laugh. Or worse, she'd bring up my mom. Say things like, "Well, I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." Then, in the same breath, she'd play the saint. "If you ever want to come home, I'll talk to your father for you." Yeah, no thanks. The years that followed were messy. I grew a thicker skin, learned who I was without her shadow hanging over me. And slowly, very slowly, I built something that looked like a life. A job, friends. Eventually, I found baking, almost by accident. I took a job at a small bakery just to make ends meet, but something about it felt right. The smell of vanilla, sugar, the quiet focus of decorating. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need her approval. I just needed to create something beautiful. Of course, peace never lasts forever, right? After years of silence, I reconnected with my dad, and by extension, her. You'd think maybe time would have softened her, that she'd mellowed out with age. But no, she was still the same bitter woman. Only now, I wasn't a scared little girl anymore. And when she tried to bite, I bit back. But I'll tell you what, nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared her for what was coming. Because karma was about to be served, and it was going to taste a whole lot like dry, cheap cake mix. You know that weird mix of pride and fear you feel on graduation day? Like, this is it, the start of something new. The world's supposed to open up for you. Yeah, mine slammed shut. That morning, I'd actually felt hopeful. I'd ironed my gown 3 times, lined up my honor cords, even curled my hair. Dad had promised he'd get off work early, and for once I believed him. Stepmom kept saying she had a surprise for me afterward, and I was naive enough to think she meant dinner reservations. She really did surprise me. When the ceremony ended, the air smelled like summer grass and cheap perfume. Parents were crying, kids were shouting, everyone was taking pictures under the banners. And there I was, searching the crowd for my dad. He waved from the parking lot, big grin, phone in hand. And beside him, her, stone-faced, arms crossed, like she'd rather be anywhere else. Still, I smiled. I wanted to believe this was a good day, my day. We took maybe 3 pictures. Then she said, flat as ever, "Ready to go?" "We've got something to discuss." Discuss. That word should have set off alarms, but I followed them home, diploma in hand, still wearing my cap because I thought maybe we were having a celebration. Instead, she went straight to the kitchen counter, opened a manila envelope, and slid it toward me like a contract. "Congratulations," she said. "You're officially an adult. You've got 30 days to find somewhere else to live." I thought it was a joke. I actually laughed, and she just stared back at me, dead serious. I looked at Dad, waiting for him to say something, anything. He rubbed the back of his neck, wouldn't meet my eyes. "She thinks it's time you learned independence," he muttered. Independence. That's what she called it. I called it betrayal. I remember every second of that argument, her voice sharp, cutting, throwing words like knives. "You're not a child anymore. You need to stop relying on us. You'll thank me one day." Thank her for throwing me out like trash. I packed that night, just me and the sound of crickets outside my window. Every box I taped shut felt like another door closing. When I carried the first load to my car, she stood in the doorway with her arms folded, making sure I didn't accidentally take anything that wasn't mine. Like I owned anything she wanted. By morning, everything I owned fit into 2 garbage bags and a cracked suitcase. Dad slipped me a $100 bill when she wasn't looking. That was his rebellion, 100 silent dollars. Then she walked me to the curb, pointed to my car, and said, "Don't forget to return your key." I tossed it into her rose bushes. The first night, I slept in the car behind a 24-hour laundromat, windows cracked, hoodie for a pillow, heart pounding every time headlights passed. I cried once, quietly, then told myself crying was useless. I had a diploma, no family, and a week before my next paycheck from the diner. Those weeks were a blur of cheap coffee, job applications, and pretending I was fine. I told coworkers I was between places, told myself I'd figure it out. But every time I drove past that house, our house, I'd see her car in the driveway and my stomach would twist. Part anger, part heartbreak. She didn't just evict me from a building, she erased me from a life. And then came the calls, because she couldn't resist twisting the knife. "Hey, just checking in," she'd chirp. Then, after a pause, "So, the real world's a little harder than you thought, huh?" Sometimes she'd slip in digs about my mom. "You're just like her, always dramatic, always needing attention." I'd hang up shaking, swear I'd never answer again, but she'd leave voicemails, each one nastier than the last. You can block a number, sure, but you can't block the voice that lives in your head. When I finally landed a steady job at a bakery, I thought things might change. Minimum wage, long hours, but it smelled like sugar and cinnamon instead of cigarette smoke and resentment. It felt safe. I rented a tiny studio apartment with peeling paint and exactly 3 working outlets. It was heaven compared to sleeping in that car. And yet, every time I baked something new, every time I felt proud, a part of me would hear her whisper, "It's not real work, it's just a hobby." She'd made sure her voice stayed with me. One night, maybe a year after the eviction, she called again. I don't even know why I picked up. Habit, maybe. She sounded almost cheerful. "Just wanted to tell you," she said. "Your dad and I are going on a cruise. He got promoted. You could have been here celebrating with us if you hadn't run off." Run off. That's what she called being kicked out. I hung up mid-sentence, blocked her, and didn't speak to her again for years. I wish I could say I healed quickly. But healing isn't cinematic. It's slow, ugly, quiet. I worked, I baked, I learned how to survive without expecting anyone to catch me. Some nights I'd sit on my fire escape with a mug of cocoa and think about how easily she discarded me. How easy it must have been for her to look me in the eyes and say, "You're on your own." And that thought, that cold, empty thought, it turned into fuel. Fuel to get better, to get stronger, to never owe her a damn thing again. By the time I hit my mid-20s, I'd built something that looked like stability. Still broke, sure, but happy. I'd gone from sleeping in a car to decorating wedding cakes. Customers loved my work. Some even asked for my recipes. And for the first time in my life, people smiled when they said my name. She'd hate that. But life has a cruel sense of humor. Because just when I thought I'd finally escaped her orbit, Dad called. He wanted to reconnect. Said he missed me. Said, "She's changed." I almost laughed in his face through the phone. But curiosity, nostalgia, maybe guilt, I said yes. I didn't realize it then, but agreeing to see him again meant stepping right back into her world. And this time, I wasn't that scared skinny kid packing trash bags. This time, I had something she couldn't stand to see. A life that didn't include her. And that's where the real story starts. Because the woman who threw me out like trash was about to find out what happens when trash takes itself out.
Hey, if you've been listening this far, you're one of the real ones. These late-night stories hit different when you know what it feels like, right? Go ahead and subscribe. Join the people who get it. Now, back to the story.
They say your 20s are supposed to be the best years of your life. Freedom, adventure, discovering who you are. Mine? Mine started with a parking ticket, 2 garbage bags, and a car that leaked oil faster than I could afford to replace it. That first year after she kicked me out was like living inside a bad country song. Everything went wrong at once. My classes slipped through my fingers. Tuition overdue, textbooks I couldn't afford, exhaustion I couldn't shake. I kept thinking, one more paycheck, one more shift, but the numbers never added up. And the loneliness. God, the loneliness hits different when you don't have a safety net. You start talking to yourself in grocery store aisles just to hear a voice that isn't judging you. I got a job at a diner off Route 9. Grease-stained aprons, 5 a.m. starts, tips that barely covered gas. Still, I clung to it. It meant I could eat. It meant I existed somewhere. The owner, Frank, was one of those gruff old guys who pretends not to care but notices everything. He'd slide me a leftover muffin when the doors closed and say, "Don't tell the others." Sometimes that free muffin was the only thing I ate all day. Nights were the hardest. When you're couch surfing, you learn to sleep light. One ear open, bag near your chest, ready to move. Friends tried to help, but pity has an expiration date. After a few weeks, their couches filled, their patience thinned, and the texts stopped coming. I couldn't blame them. I'd grown up unwanted. I knew the signs when someone was done with me. Eventually, I found a roommate, Kyle. We met when I spilled coffee on his sketchbook at the diner. Instead of yelling, he laughed and said, "Looks better that way." He had this tiny apartment over a hardware store, and when he heard I was sleeping in my car, he said, "I've got a couch. It's lumpy, but it's better than asphalt." That couch became home. For months. Years, actually. We were both broke, both stubborn, both trying to turn scraps into something that looked like a life. He was an artist. I was a waitress with a half-dead dream of college. We'd sit on the floor eating dollar store noodles, talking about who we wanted to become. I used to tell him I wanted to be a psychologist, to understand people, to help them. He'd grin and say, "Funny, considering how much you already read people without a degree." He wasn't wrong. When you grow up around manipulators, you become fluent in reading silence. But even with that friendship, the darkness crept in. Depression isn't just sadness. It's emptiness that eats everything good. Some mornings I'd sit in the shower because standing felt like too much. I'd stare at the drain and think about how easy it would be to just stop trying. But every time those thoughts came, I'd hear her voice in my head, that smug, condescending tone saying, "You'll never make it without me." And that's what kept me alive. Not hope, not faith, just pure, stubborn spite. Around that time, I started baking again. It sounds cliché, but it was therapy before I could afford therapy. The diner let staff use the ovens after hours, and one night I stayed late and made a batch of cookies. The smell, sugar, butter, vanilla, it hit me like a memory from a life I never had. Frank tasted one, squinted, and said, "You might be in the wrong job, kid." That line stuck with me, because maybe he was right. So, between shifts, I taught myself everything I could about pastry. YouTube tutorials, old library books, trial and error until my hands ached. Kyle became my taste tester. He'd exaggerate every bite like a cartoon character, saying, "If you ever open a bakery, call it Survival Sweets." Honestly, not a bad name. The more I baked, the more I healed. There was something about the precision, measuring, timing, the quiet focus, that steadied me. You can't fake a perfect meringue. You can't rush a proofing dough. Baking forces you to slow down and pay attention, something I'd never been allowed to do growing up. And when people at the diner started asking to buy my pastries, for the first time I felt wanted for something I created. But healing doesn't erase the past. Every success carried an echo of her disapproval. When I got promoted to head baker's assistant, I caught myself whispering, "See, I can make it," as if she were still standing over my shoulder. Even free, she lived rent-free in my head. One night, Kyle and I were walking home when he said, "You ever think about calling your dad?" I stopped cold. The streetlight buzzed overhead, and for a second I imagined dialing that old number. Her voice answering instead. Her pretending to be sweet while twisting the knife. I shook my head. "I'm not ready," I said. He just nodded. "Then don't be. Not for them. For you." That's the thing about found family. They don't demand closure. They just give you space to breathe. Years went by. The diner closed. I moved to a small bakery across town. It was there I met real professionals. People who saw potential, not pity. They trained me, challenged me, taught me that passion could be a career. And little by little, my life stopped feeling like an accident. I remember the day my first paycheck covered rent and groceries. I stood in that tiny apartment and actually laughed out loud. I was still poor, but I wasn't powerless. Then, one morning, I opened my phone to a missed call from an unknown number. Voicemail. Her voice. She sounded cheerful. Too cheerful. Like nothing had ever happened. "Hi, sweetheart. It's been so long. Your dad and I were just talking about you. He misses you, you know. You should come by sometime." Sweetheart. The same mouth that called me a burden now wanted to play mother again. I deleted it, blocked the number, went to work and piped buttercream roses until my hands cramped. But the seed was planted. Part of me wondered, had she really changed? Or was this just another trap? The truth? I didn't care anymore. Because by then, I had built something solid enough that her opinion didn't define me. At least, that's what I told myself. Because when Dad called a year later and said he wanted to see me, really see me, my chest tightened. I said yes. Of course I did. And that single yes was the first step toward the confrontation I didn't even know I'd been waiting for. The day I'd finally stop being the scared kid she kicked out and become the woman who'd make her choke on her own words. You ever hit that point in your life where you realize no one's coming to save you? Yeah, that was me. After years of clawing through dead-end jobs, sleeping on couches, and counting coins to buy cheap coffee, I woke up one morning and thought, this can't be it. I was tired. Not the kind of tired a nap fixes, but that deep, bone-level exhaustion that comes from being underestimated for too long. And then, I stumbled into baking. Yeah, I know. Not the big psychologist, veterinarian, or teacher dream my younger self imagined. But the first time I walked into that little bakery, smelling like butter and cinnamon and warmth, I swear, something in me clicked. I remember it clear as day. It was this cozy spot downtown, tucked between a thrift store and a tattoo parlor. The kind of place that looks like it's been there forever. Flower dust in the air, soft jazz playing from a speaker that crackled every now and then. And behind the counter was this older guy, sleeves rolled up, frosting a cake like it was an art form. He looked up, grinned, and said, "You here to order or to work?" And I just laughed. Because honestly, I didn't even know why I'd gone in there. But that moment, that question, changed everything. I started working part-time, mostly washing dishes and organizing boxes of pastries, but I watched. Every swirl of frosting, every glaze, every mistake turned into something beautiful. And before long, I wanted to try. My boss, David, he wasn't the sentimental type, but he saw something in me. He'd say, "You've got good hands, kid. Careful hands. That matters more than fancy schooling." So I learned, from scratch. I learned that patience is the soul of good pastry, that sugar and heat are like people. They both need balance, or they'll burn everything down. And maybe that's what hooked me, the control. For once, something in my life made sense. A few months later, I baked my first real cake. Nothing fancy, just vanilla sponge with buttercream and berries on top. But when I tasted it, I actually cried. Because it was mine. No one could take it from me. No one could twist it into something ugly. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about healing. And from there, everything started to fall into place. I met my fiancé, Ben, around that time too. He came in one morning for coffee and a croissant, and ended up staying for an hour just to talk. You know those people who make you feel seen? Like, really seen? That was him. He didn't care that I didn't have a degree, or that my past was messy. He just cared about me. And for the first time in forever, I started to believe I was enough. But here's the thing about people like my stepmom. They can smell happiness on you, and they hate it. When I finally reached out to my dad again, years later, It was like opening a door I'd nailed shut. I didn't want drama, I just missed him. And to talk to him meant, inevitably, dealing with her. She hadn't changed. Not one bit. Still that same venom disguised as sugar. Still the fake smile, the, "Oh, you've gained a little weight," comments, the passive digs at my career. But this time, I wasn't that scared, hungry 18-year-old kid. I had a home, a life, a business family who respected me, and someone who loved me without conditions. So I smiled through her comments, played nice when I had to, but I started to notice the cracks. Her husband, my dad, didn't light up around her anymore. Her friends didn't stay long at her parties. Even her own siblings barely tolerated her. It was like her empire of control was finally starting to crumble, and I wasn't even pushing. Not yet. Then came the turning point, my dad's birthday. He was turning 60, and I wanted to do something special. So I offered to bake him a cake, a real one. 3 tiers of red velvet, layered with cream cheese frosting, covered in handmade sugar roses. I stayed up till 3 a.m. that night, humming to myself in the bakery kitchen, covered in flour and love and this deep, peaceful joy. The next day, I brought it to the party. Everyone loved it. Everyone except her. She took one bite, dabbed her mouth with a napkin, and said, mocking tone, "It tastes like a box mix." I swear I could feel my stomach drop. That's all she said. After all the work, all the care, all the hours, box mix. I smiled, tight, and said nothing. But inside, something snapped. That night, lying next to Ben, I just kept replaying it in my head. Not the insult, I'd had worse, but the pattern. No matter what I did, no matter how much I built myself up, she had to tear it down. And I realized I'd been playing defense my whole life. But not anymore. The next morning she called me, all chipper, and said, "You know, my 50th is coming up. You'll make my cake, right?" No please, no thank you, just expectation. And I said, "Sure, just like that." But this time, I wasn't baking for approval. I was baking for closure. That's when the idea hit me. Poetic, simple, devastatingly fitting. If she wanted box mix, I'd give her box mix. Every last dry, lifeless crumb of it. And I swear I smiled for the first time in days. Because revenge can be delicious. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one holding the whisk. And the next chapter? That's when I made sure she'd never forget it. You ever get an idea that feels small at first? Almost childish? And then, the more you think about it, the more it grows into something huge? That's how the cake plan started. One tiny, ridiculous notion that ballooned into the sweetest form of payback. Then a hushed, excited tone. She wanted box mix? Fine. I'd serve her sincerity in a disposable tin. I'd hand her the one thing she valued most, the illusion of superiority, and let it choke on it. First off, I didn't want this to be messy. I didn't want drama with chairs thrown or windows smashed. I wanted it clean, surgical, unforgettable. Think of it like a perfectly executed recipe. Timing, temperature, patience. Everything in its place. So I did what any pastry chef with a grudge and a conscience would do. I prepared 2 things. Number 1, the public cake. The one I'd bring to the party, wrapped in the exact plainness she expected. Sheet cakes, cheap frosting. Bland, dry, predictable. The kind of cake you see at potlucks where no one admits to having made it. Number 2, The private cake. The one the real me would create if I were being generous to the world. But that one? That stayed in the kitchen with Ben and me, laughing over frosting smears. That cake was mine to enjoy, not hers. I stocked up on the box mixes, like a rude florist buying flowers she hates. 20 mixes, vanilla, yellow, one aisle of powdered disappointment. I bought the cheapest canned frosting I could find. I bought those little disposable pans you use for casseroles at church fundraisers. I even grabbed a plastic spatula, the kind of tool that screams, "I didn't try." Then I did something I'd never done before. I pretended to take pride in mediocrity. Baking the fake cakes was oddly therapeutic. There's something perversely comforting about following the exact 3-step instructions you've always mocked. Empty the bag. Add water, oil, eggs. Mix until uniform. Pour. Bake. Cool. Smother in frosting like it's the final insult. I bake them on my day off, while humming under my breath, thinking of every little jibe she'd made across the years. Every bless her heart that cut open my confidence. Every time she'd praised store-bought and mocked my hands. Each insult folded neatly, like flour into batter. People might call this childish revenge. Maybe it was. But when a person has spent a lifetime reducing you to crumbs, sometimes you get very creative about how to use them. I packed those cakes into a battered cardboard box, the kind you can barely close because the cakes are too many and too proud in their ugliness. I taped it up, took a breath, and walked to my car. At the bakery, Ben met me at the back door, eyes wide. He didn't ask questions because he knows how my brain works. Instead, he looped his arm through mine and said, "Do it. Make her taste herself." I kissed him, quick and fierce, and drove the box of humiliation to my dad's house. The house was the same, but somehow smaller. Smaller because I'd once been big in it, loud and alive. And now the walls just echoed. People were already gathering in the backyard. Streamers flapped like tired flags. Laughter, the clink of cutlery, the hum of false joy. She stood by the folding table near the grill, hair perfect, outfit coordinated. That same little plastic smile nailed in place. She saw me with the box and her eyes flicked to my hands. "Oh good, you brought the cake," she said. Her voice was syrupy, the kind of sweetness that hides a knife. I set the box down with the kind of care you reserve for records you plan to break. My hands were steady. I opened it like I was revealing a magic trick for children. And there they were. Rows of pale, identical sheet cakes, thick with canned frosting. Little plastic roses that looked like they belonged on a dollar store crown. The room hummed. Someone remarked on how convenient it was that I'd brought so much. She smiled that smug smile and grabbed a paper plate. "Thank you, sweetheart. How thoughtful." Then the slow crush. Then she took a bite. She chewed slowly, as if the moment deserved a dramatic pause. Everyone watched, because of course they did. This is the human meat grinder. Eyes on the target. Her face didn't change much at first. Someone clapped a hand to their mouth and laughed. "Cute," they said. The old aunt who liked to stir the pot nodded approvingly. And then she said it. "Oh, this is nice." Nice. Like a compliment you give a stranger. Not the blistering public box mix she'd thrown at my red velvet cake months earlier. Not a single acknowledgement of my effort. Just a polite, damp, nice. I wanted to laugh so hard I'd choke on it. Here's the thing people don't always understand about revenge. The momentum matters. It's not just the act, it's the reaction. You want the world to notice the justice of it. You want the scales to tip, even if only for a moment. So after she'd eaten, after people had complimented how simple and quaint the desserts were, I did what any professional with stagecraft would do. I offered to take the leftover cake inside. Everyone agreed. Better to not leave sugary death in the heat. I walked into the kitchen, clutched the box, and with all the theatrics of a stage magician, I pulled out the plain cakes and set them on the counter. The family whoops and the backyard noise dimmed into a soft, distant hum. Ben had contrived to be there, a silent sentinel with a camera always poised. Then, with calm hands, I reached into my apron and pulled out a second box. Small, discreet, wrapped in linen. The private cake. The one I'd made for Dad. The real father who loved me. The one with cream cheese frosting, handmade sugar roses, and a texture so moist you could sink into it like a pillow. I set the real cake on the counter. I didn't announce it. I didn't need to. The way I placed it, the way the light hit the frosting, said enough. People noticed. A hush fell, natural and immediate. My father walked in and his face changed. The softening you see in men who are thrilled to be seen by the child they missed. He hugged me, surprised and a little ashamed maybe, and said, "You didn't have to do this." I smiled, and for a second, the old resentment fell away. This was for him. For the man who slipped me that $100 bill in secret. The man who had been too afraid to stand up. Outside, I could feel the shift. Conversation stalled. Eyes shifted from the plastic roses to the real ones. People whispered, curious. My stepmom's smile flickered like a candle in a breeze. She came into the kitchen like a queen entering a small, uncomfortable court. Her lips curved in that practiced way. "Oh, a cake?" she said, voice bright. I didn't say much. I didn't have to. I simply cut a slice and handed it to her. Not too big, not too small. Completely ordinary. A slice of my craft. A slice of everything she'd tried to demean. She took it. Her hands were steady, like someone who always expects applause. She raised it to her lips. And then, the world leaned forward. She tasted it. Her eyes widened, just a fraction. Then a little more. For a heartbeat, all the barbs and polished cruelty fell away, and something honest flickered across her face. Surprise. Maybe even admiration. Maybe guilt. It lasted a sliver of time, long enough for me to drink it in. She swallowed. The air in the room changed. I saw it around her. The small corners of shame, the calculations in her face when she realized she hadn't won this round. People started murmuring, comparing notes. Where'd this come from? Did she make that? That's incredible. She tried to recover, launched into a compliment that landed like a missed step. "Oh, that's good. How sweet of you to do this." But it was thin. She looked small. For the first time in my adult life, I saw her as something other than a towering, untouchable figure. I saw a woman who had clearly, in some small way, been outgrown. And at that precise moment, I felt something like peace. Not total peace. Revenge is rarely pure, but a warm, blunt satisfaction. I had given my father a real gift and shown everyone the difference between craft and convenience. She'd been served her own medicine, plated and tidy. We left before dessert finished. Ben and I walked out hand in hand, my shoulder warm against his. I could hear the whispers behind us, the small unkindnesses being chewed and swallowed. I didn't need to watch her choke on it. I knew she had, in whatever ways mattered. That night, my dad called and thanked me with a voice that trembled. He said he'd never tasted anything like that cake, that it brought him back to a happier time. I told him I was glad. And maybe, this is the truth. Part of me wanted him to feel proud. Not for me being right, not for her being wrong, but for the small sign that the life I built had weight. That I wasn't some failed child she'd thrown away. I was someone who could create, who could make joy, who could make a room hush. For a long time after, I replayed the scene. Not the insult, not the humiliation. The moment she tasted the real cake, the flicker on her face. The way people turned toward me, not away. It wasn't about gloating. It was about reclaiming dignity. About showing up and making something so undeniably true that even her lies couldn't touch it. And for the first time in a long time, I slept that night full. Not full of revenge, though that tasted sweet, but full of something steadier. The knowledge that I'd taken myself seriously when no one else had. You know that silence after something big happens? Not the peaceful kind, the weird one. The kind that hums under your skin because you know people are talking, just not where you can hear them. That was the week after her birthday. The first one came the next morning, Dad. He sounded tired, the kind of tired you don't fix with sleep. He said, "I think she's embarrassed." And I said, "Good." He didn't scold me, he just went quiet for a long time, and finally said, "I guess it's been a long time coming." There it was, the truth hiding in plain sight. Even he knew it. Apparently, the party had turned into a slow-motion disaster once I left. People kept asking her where she ordered the nice cake from. Someone even tagged me on Instagram, thinking they were giving her credit. The post said, "Incredible cake tonight," with my handle under it. By the next morning, her DMs were full of questions she didn't want to answer. Now, she's a woman who lives for optics. Birthday parties weren't about turning 50. They were about proving she'd won at 50. And nothing breaks a facade faster than people realizing it's made of frosting and lies. Her friends started comparing stories. Apparently, I wasn't the only person she'd rubbed raw over the years. One of her coworkers told my dad that when they saw her snap at the waiter during brunch, they understood exactly why her stepdaughter got creative. That one made me laugh out loud. The family group chat, yeah, that cursed digital battlefield, went quiet for a few days. Then came the divided camps. Half thought I'd gone too far. Half thought I'd simply returned the energy she'd been putting out since I was a kid. Guess which half I kept in touch with? The weirdest part? Dad and I got closer. He started calling just to talk, about work, the dog, random things like recipes he'd seen online. Sometimes he'd mention her in passing, never unkindly, just carefully. I think he finally realized how much ground he'd lost by always trying to keep the peace. One evening, he said, "You know, she keeps insisting you humiliated her." I said, "She compared my life's work to a box mix." I just listened. He laughed, really laughed. First time I'd heard that sound from him in years. A week later, she called. Unknown number, but I knew the voice before she said my name. She didn't apologize, of course not. She circled around it, though, like a cat around a bathtub. She said, "You made your point." And I said, "Did I?" Silence. Then the sigh, that long, practiced one she uses when she wants to sound wounded. She said she hoped we could move forward. I told her I'd already moved. Then I hung up. That was the first time I'd ever ended one of our conversations on my terms. Word travels fast in small towns. People came by the bakery, pretending to order pastries but really wanting the story. They'd lean over the counter, eyes gleaming, whispering, "So, did you really make her a box cake?" And I'd just smile and say, "She got exactly what she asked for." Those words became a bit of a legend around here. Regulars repeat them whenever someone complains about getting what they deserve. It's become this little local proverb, "You got what you ordered." And every time I hear it, I feel this quiet hum of pride. The months rolled by. Business picked up. Ben and I started talking about buying the bakery outright when the owner retires. Sometimes, late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of the old me in the reflection of the bakery window. The kid who used to measure her worth by someone else's voice. And I'll think, she'd be proud. Not because of the revenge, though that part still makes her grin, but because she learned how to build instead of beg. A few weeks ago, Dad stopped by, unannounced. He brought a bouquet of tulips, my mom's favorite. He said he'd been thinking a lot about the past and wanted to see where you make all that magic. We sat in the back, shared a coffee, and talked for hours. At one point, he said, "I should have stepped in sooner." And I told him, "You did what you knew how to do." He nodded. Maybe that was all either of us needed. Yesterday, I got a text from an unknown number. Just one line. "Your cake tasted better than mine ever could." No name, but I didn't need one. I didn't reply. Some things don't need answers. Some silences are victories. People think revenge is about destruction, but sometimes it's just about equilibrium, about making the scales level after years of someone pressing their thumb down on your side. I didn't ruin her birthday out of spite. I did it because, for once, I wanted the truth to taste exactly the way it deserved to. And you know what? It was perfect. Sweet, simple, and entirely mine. I used to think closure came with fireworks. Some grand apology, some cinematic ending where everyone finally sees your side. Turns out, it's quieter than that. More like the sound of an oven cooling after the heat's gone. After the birthday fiasco faded from gossip to memory, life slipped back into its rhythm. Mornings smell like vanilla and espresso again. The phone doesn't buzz with drama. And when I lock up the bakery at night, there's this steady silence that feels earned, You know, when you've lived your whole life waiting for someone's approval, peace feels almost suspicious at first, like you're forgetting something. But then, one evening, you realize you're just content. That's the moment you stop rehearsing old conversations in your head. The funny part? I don't even think about the cake anymore. Not in a bitter way, anyway. Now it's just another story I tell when a young baker gets nervous about criticism. I'll say, listen, if people can't taste your heart in it, that's on them. Because that's the truth. Some folks will always prefer the box mix version of life. Easier to swallow, less to question. But me? I like the messy, scratch-made kind. The one that takes time and leaves dishes in the sink, but makes the house smell like living. Dad visits the shop every Sunday now. He sits by the window, reads the paper, and orders whatever I'm testing that day. Sometimes he brings friends. Sometimes he just brings himself. He doesn't talk about her much, and I don't ask. We both know some bridges don't need rebuilding, just respectful distance across the water. But when he hugs me goodbye, there's this weight lifted from both of us, like we finally stepped out of the roles she wrote for us. Ben and I signed the papers last month. The bakery's ours now. The keys felt heavy in my palm, but in a good way. We celebrated with champagne and leftover croissants, sitting on the floor surrounded by flour dust and hope. He said, "You did it." And I said, "We did." Because that's the real secret ingredient. People who see you as more than what you've survived. Every once in a while, I think about writing her a letter. Not an apology, not even forgiveness, just acknowledgement. I'd tell her that in a strange way, she taught me resilience, that her cruelty gave me contrast, that without the darkness, maybe I wouldn't appreciate the glow of my own kitchen lights at 2 a.m. while sugar caramelizes on the stove. But then I remember, she already got her message, served on a paper plate. And I closed the notebook. If I had to write a recipe for peace, it'd go something like this. 1 cup of acceptance for the things you can't change. 2 spoons of effort for the things you can. A handful of boundaries, firm but not bitter. And a pinch of humor, because life without laughter tastes flat. Mix them slow. Let them rise on their own time. And when it's done, share it only with people who make you feel safe. That's it. That's the secret. I used to chase revenge like it was justice, but what I found instead was balance. The simple joy of knowing I don't have to flinch when the past knocks. So, if you've ever been belittled or made to feel small, here's the truth. You don't owe anyone your silence or your sweetness. You just owe yourself the chance to rebuild. And when you finally do, when you look around and realize your life is steady, your hands are steady, and your heart's not begging anymore, that's the sweetest thing you'll ever make. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. It's just quiet peace after years of noise. And sometimes, that's enough. If this story hit home, don't forget to subscribe for more late-night confessions. Real voices, real stories, and endings that finally taste like closure. Until next time, sleep easy.